What would you do if your best friend, the person you trusted most, stole your dream? Imagine building something from scratch, pouring your late nights, your ambition, and your soul into it, only to watch the one person you thought would always have your back walk away with it. That's not a scene from a movie. It's what happened to me. Friendship is supposed to be the safest place, the bond that shields you from betrayal. But sometimes, betrayal doesn't come from your enemies. It comes from the person who knows you best, the one who's been close enough to study your every move, your every weakness, your every idea. That's what makes it cut so deep. It isn't just theft, it's a violation of trust, an invasion into the most sacred part of your life. I didn't see it coming at first. Maybe I was too blinded by loyalty, too eager to share my vision, too proud of what we were building together. We used to sit in coffee shops until closing time, sketching ideas on napkins, whispering about how this one idea could change everything. We laughed about how someday, when investors lined up at our door, we'd look back at these early days and smile. I believed in that dream, and I believed in her. But dreams can turn into weapons when trust is broken. That night, when I learned she had taken everything, our plans, our strategies, even the pitch we worked on together, and presented it as her own, something inside me shattered. I wasn't just betrayed, I was challenged. This isn't a story of a friendship lost. It's the story of how betrayal became the spark that pushed me further than I ever thought I could go. And it begins right here. Every great idea starts as a whisper. Mine began late at night, when the city was quiet, and the only sound in my apartment was the tapping of keys on my worn-out laptop. At first, it didn't feel like a groundbreaking vision. It was just a spark, an instinct that something was missing in the world, and that I could be the one to fill the gap. I had no blueprint, no roadmap, no investors. What I had was a restless energy that kept me awake, sketching notes in journals, drawing crude diagrams on the backs of receipts, and chasing down every what if that entered my mind. It wasn't just an idea. It was a calling. And it became my obsession. I would go to work during the day, perform like everyone else. But the second I came home, I slipped into another world entirely. My apartment turned into a workshop, my table piled with notebooks, sticky notes covering the walls, screens filled with drafts and research. I sacrificed nights out with friends, vacations, even sleep. While others were celebrating weekends, I was building something that didn't even exist yet. Something that lived only in my imagination, but that felt more real to me than anything else. And then she came into the picture. My best friend. The person who had seen me through failures before, who knew the quiet ache of my ambitions, who encouraged me when I doubted myself. She was there for the early days, the late nights in cafes when we would nurse one coffee for hours just to have a table to brainstorm at. I let her into my vision because I trusted her. Together, we scribbled on napkins, laughed about silly slogans, and pieced together fragments of a dream. Small victories followed. A prototype that actually worked. A small online test that gained more traction than I expected. The first time I saw strangers, people I didn't know, show interest in what I was building. It felt like validation, like the universe was whispering, "You're onto something." Those moments carried me through the exhaustion, through the sacrifices that no one else could see. The vision wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about success in the traditional sense. It was about building something meaningful, something that had the power to change lives, even in the smallest of ways. I wanted to create something that mattered, something that would leave a mark, even if my name was never attached to it. Looking back, those days were golden, not because they were easy, but because they were pure. I didn't care about competition or recognition. I cared about the process, the thrill of discovery, the joy of creating something out of nothing, the quiet confidence that I was building a future with my own two hands. but passion has a weight to it. Every decision felt monumental. Every mistake felt catastrophic. I had no safety net, no guarantee that any of this would work. I gave up dinners, dates, and moments with family because I believed so strongly in what I was creating. My friends teased me about being married to an idea, and maybe they were right. But I couldn't let it go. Not when I was so close to shaping something that could actually matter. She was there for those sacrifices too. Nights when I couldn't afford dinner, she'd bring takeout. Times when I doubted myself, she'd tell me I was brilliant. I leaned on her, not realizing that the same person who lifted me up could one day use my trust as a weapon. At the time, it felt like partnership. I thought we were building something together, but in reality, I was bearing my soul while she was memorizing the blueprint. The dream wasn't just a startup. It was the reflection of every sleepless night, every abandoned plan, every ounce of hope I had poured into it. And as it began to take shape, I started to believe, not just that it could succeed, but that maybe, just maybe, this was my purpose. What I didn't know then was that the very dream I was shaping was also shaping me. It was teaching me resilience, discipline, and vision. But it was also setting the stage for the betrayal that would break me open and ultimately make me stronger than I had ever imagined. Some friendships arrive quietly, without fireworks or grand beginnings. Ours was like that, simple, natural, and effortless. We met at a time when both of us were still figuring out who we wanted to be, and in the noise of classrooms, crowded streets, and endless responsibilities, we found comfort in each other's presence. She wasn't just another friend. She was the person who made the world feel less heavy. With her, laughter came easy, and silence was never awkward. We weren't perfect mirrors of each other. She was louder, more outgoing, with a charm that drew people in like moths to a flame. I was quieter, more reserved, the one who analyzed before speaking. And yet that difference became the glue between us. Where I was cautious, she was daring. Where she rushed ahead, I steadied her. Over time, our personalities didn't clash. They harmonized. The memories are countless, but a few still shine brighter than the rest. The nights when we stayed up until dawn, talking about dreams so wild they felt like secrets stolen from the stars. The afternoons when we skipped obligations, choosing instead to sit in coffee shops scribbling notes about someday. The silly jokes only we understood, the kind that made strangers look at us as though we were speaking another language. I remember one rainy evening vividly. We were huddled under a single umbrella, laughing as water soaked our shoes. She looked at me and said, half serious, "We're going to build something great one day, you and me." At the time, it felt like a sweet promise, a dream shared between two young women with nothing but ambition in their pockets. I didn't know then how much weight those words would carry, or how they would come back to haunt me. What made her different from everyone else was the way she showed up. When I doubted myself, she didn't just tell me I was capable. She listed every reason why. When I succeeded in small ways, she celebrated louder than I did. She wasn't just a spectator to my life, she was part of it, stitched into the fabric of my daily existence. That's why, when I began shaping my startup idea, it felt only natural to share it with her. Trust is a fragile thing, but with her, I never questioned it. She knew my weaknesses, my fears, my insecurities, and instead of exploiting them, she made me feel safe. I told her things I wouldn't tell anyone else, the kind of secrets you carry alone unless you find someone who feels like family, and she was family to me. Blood didn't make us sisters, loyalty did. We shared not only dreams, but also burdens. When money was tight, she lent a hand without keeping score. When family pressures mounted, she was the ear I poured my frustrations into. I can still hear her voice saying, "Don't worry, you've got me." And I believed her. Completely. There's a certain intimacy in sharing ambitions with someone. It's not just about telling them what you want to achieve. It's about letting them into the raw, vulnerable parts of yourself, the places where fear and hope collide. She saw those parts of me. She knew how badly I wanted to build something meaningful, how much I was willing to sacrifice. She understood the weight I carried as the responsible one, the one who never allowed herself to fail. And instead of laughing at my seriousness, she fueled it. I think that's why the betrayal cut so deep later on. Because it wasn't just about stolen ideas or broken promises. It was about the foundation of trust we had built, brick by brick, moment by moment, being smashed to pieces. Betrayal from a stranger wounds. Betrayal from someone you considered family destroys. At the time, though, I saw none of that coming. Back then, she was my anchor and my wings at once. We could spend hours mapping out futures that felt both impossible and inevitable. She would sketch big, bold ideas, and I would ground them in strategy. I admired her energy, the way she believed anything was possible, and she admired my discipline, the way I could take a vague dream and turn it into a step-by-step plan. Together, it felt like we were unstoppable. There's a snapshot burned into my memory. The two of us sitting cross-legged on my floor, papers scattered around, half-empty coffee cups nearby. She was grinning, her eyes alive with excitement, and I was smiling too, exhausted but hopeful. That night, we didn't just talk about building a business. We talked about building a future. I let myself believe we were in this together, that our loyalty to each other was unshakable. Friendship like that becomes a lens through which you see the world. I didn't just trust her with ideas. I trusted her with myself. Every victory I imagined, I pictured her standing beside me. Every hardship I anticipated, I imagined us facing it together. That's how deeply entwined we had become. Looking back, I realize how blind trust can be. But at the time, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She wasn't just my best friend. She was my sister in every way that mattered. And when someone is family, you don't guard your heart. You hand it over freely, believing it will be protected. That's what made the fracture so devastating. I didn't just lose a friend. I lost the person I had trusted more than anyone. But in those early days, before the cracks appeared, all I saw was loyalty, laughter, and love. The bond we built was real, or at least I believed it was, and that belief made everything that followed hurt 10 times more. At first, everything still felt the same. We laughed, we dreamed, we planned. But looking back, I can see how the cracks began to form long before the collapse. They weren't obvious fractures. They were hairline lines in the glass. Barely visible, easy to dismiss, but dangerous all the same. It started with small remarks, the kind you shrug off because you can't imagine malice behind them. When I shared a new feature idea for the startup, she would grin and say, "You're so serious, always overthinking. I'd just wing it." At the time, I laughed with her, brushing it off as her playful personality. But beneath the lightheartedness, there was a subtle dismissal, a way of belittling the discipline I had poured my soul into. Jealousy doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides in the smallest shifts. When I got positive feedback from a mentor, she smiled and congratulated me. But her eyes lingered a moment too long, her tone a shade too flat. When others praised my focus, she'd joke, "Don't boost her ego too much. She'll forget she's human." I chuckled along, not realizing how much those jokes were really tiny cuts. I remember one evening after a long brainstorming session, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You know you're lucky I'm around. Without me, you'd never sell this idea to anyone." I laughed then, thinking she was teasing, but the comment stuck with me. Lucky? The word echoed in my mind. I hadn't thought of it that way. I thought we were equals, two halves of the same vision. But in her mind, was I the one dependent on her? Then came the probing questions. At first, they seemed harmless, just curiosity. So, when you pitch to investors, what's your plan? Do you think they'll like your idea, or will they want to change it? Who else have you told? I answered freely because why wouldn't I? She was my best friend, my partner in dreams. But slowly, I noticed the precision of her inquiries. They weren't casual. She wanted specifics, names, strategies, timelines. And though I didn't recognize it then, she was quietly mapping out the blueprint of everything I was building. The first real sting came one afternoon in a cafe. I was sharing updates about progress when she leaned across the table and said, "What if I pitched the idea instead, just as an experiment? You know, to see how investors react." I froze for a second, confused. Then she laughed and waved it off. "I'm joking, relax." I forced a smile, relieved it was only a joke. But a seed had been planted. I didn't know it yet, but she had just revealed her hand. Her competitiveness also began to surface in subtle ways. If someone praised me, she would immediately find a way to highlight her own strengths. If I received recognition for hard work, she would point out something I had overlooked. Once, when I stayed up all night refining a pitch deck, she skimmed through it and said, "It's good, but if I had done it, I would have made it more stylish." I brushed it off, telling myself I was being too sensitive. But each remark added weight, building a quiet tension I couldn't name. Looking back, I realized how much I wanted to protect the image of our friendship. To admit that something was off felt like betrayal in itself, so I ignored the warnings. I convinced myself she was just teasing, that maybe I was reading too much into things. After all, she was my best friend. She would never hurt me, right? But the red flags kept appearing. She started asking more about timelines, about how much capital I thought I needed, about which investors were approachable. At times, her questions felt almost rehearsed. I told myself she was just interested, invested in our shared dream. The truth was darker. She was studying me, collecting information for a future I couldn't yet imagine. One night, I noticed something I'll never forget. We were at a gathering with a few acquaintances, and someone casually asked me about my work. Before I could answer, she jumped in, describing my idea with surprising authority, claiming, "We're working on something exciting together." The word we landed heavy. I didn't correct her. Why would I? But there was something unsettling about how easily she claimed ownership. She didn't say, "She's working on something." She said, "We." At the time, it felt flattering, proof that she was proud of me, proud of us. But later, I'd realize it was her way of planting seeds in other people's minds, aligning herself with my vision, inch by inch. The tension grew in ways I couldn't name then. She started comparing us, sometimes in jest, sometimes with a sharper edge. "You're the brains, I'm the charm. You're the hard worker, I'm the one who can sell it. You're lucky you've got me to balance you out." Each phrase sounded like banter, but the undertone was clear. She was carving out her role, establishing a narrative where my strengths weren't enough without her. There was one particular moment that, in hindsight, feels like the universe shouting at me. I had just received a call from an investor expressing interest. Overwhelmed with joy, I shared the news with her, expecting celebration. Instead, she tilted her head, smiled thinly, and said, "Well, don't get too excited. Sometimes investors say things they don't mean." Then she changed the subject. I laughed it off, but inside, I felt the sting. That was the first time. Her support felt conditional, like she wasn't rooting for me as much as she was measuring me. I didn't realize it then, but my trust was slowly being chipped away. Not by a single grand betrayal, but by these tiny fractures, the jokes, the questions, the subtle dismissals. Betrayal rarely comes crashing down all at once. It creeps in, disguised as concern, as humor, as friendship. By the time the storm finally hit, the warning signs had already been painted all around me. I just chose not to see them. There are moments in life that cleave your world into two distinct halves, the time before and the time after. For me, that dividing line was drawn the day I discovered my best friend, the person I trusted most, had pitched my startup idea, as if it were her own. It happened on an ordinary morning, the kind where you wake up with no expectation that your entire reality is about to shift. I was sipping coffee, my laptop open, scrolling through emails when a subject line caught my eye. Excited about your friend's pitch. Let's connect soon. My heart skipped. Friend's pitch? Confused, I opened it, only to read a message, congratulating her for presenting an idea that sounded eerily, painfully familiar. My idea. My dream. My late nights, my notebooks, my sleepless sacrifices, spoken by her lips as though they had always belonged to her. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe they misunderstood. Maybe she had mentioned the concept casually and someone exaggerated. But the more I read, the more undeniable it became. The investor outlined details, specifics only I had ever shared. Terminology from my pitch deck, phrases I had agonized over, strategies I had drafted in the solitude of long nights. She hadn't just borrowed a vague concept. She had stolen the very bones and blood of what I had built. The disbelief hit harder than the anger. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, my coffee growing cold. This was the same girl I had trusted with my secrets, my insecurities, my ambitions, the one who had cheered me on, or so I thought, through every small victory. To imagine her standing, in front of investors, smiling with that charm of hers, weaving my vision into her own story, felt surreal. Betrayal has a way of making the air feel heavy, as if even breathing requires effort. When the anger finally surged, it was like fire in my chest. I paced the room, replaying every red flag I had ignored, every dismissive joke, every probing question. They all snapped into place like puzzle pieces, revealing the picture I hadn't wanted to see. She had been preparing for this, studying me, collecting information, positioning herself as my partner until she didn't need me anymore. And the cruelest part? She had waited until the idea was ripe, until the investors were circling, until my vision was undeniable. Before snatching it from my hands, I called her immediately. My fingers trembled as I dialed, my mind racing with words I couldn't form. She answered on the second ring, her tone casual, almost cheerful. "Hey, what's up?" I couldn't hold back. "Why did I just get an email congratulating you? For pitching my idea?" There was a pause, then a soft laugh, low and deliberate. "Oh, that. Don't be so dramatic. I just wanted to see how it would land. You know, test the waters." Test the waters. My stomach turned. "You took everything?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "The slides, the language, the strategies, I trusted you." Her voice hardened, the pretense slipping. "Look, you're great at ideas, but let's be honest. You're not the one investors are going to believe in. You overthink. You hesitate. I can sell it better, and if this thing ever takes off, we both win." The audacity of her words left me speechless. In her mind, betrayal wasn't even betrayal. It was strategy. She wasn't sorry. She didn't even think she'd done anything wrong. In her narrative, she was the savior, the one bold enough to carry my idea into the world. I didn't need a savior, I snapped. I needed a friend. For the first time, there was silence on her end. Then she said quietly, almost coldly, "This is how the game works. You should know that by now." And with that, she hung up. The heartbreak that followed wasn't the kind you feel when a business deal falls through. It was deeper, more personal, because it wasn't just about intellectual property or opportunities. It was about trust. She didn't just steal my idea. She stole my faith in her, in us, in the years of friendship I thought were unshakable. The days that followed blurred together. Investors reached out, some congratulating me mistakenly, others asking to clarify who was leading the project. I felt humiliated, exposed, as though my private dream had been paraded without my consent. I drafted emails trying to explain, to untangle the mess, but every word tasted bitter. Then came the meeting. One of the investors who had been intrigued by my original pitch requested a face-to-face. I walked into the conference room with a knot in my stomach, bracing for questions I didn't want to answer. And there she was, sitting confidently across the table, smiling like nothing was amiss. The air was electric, charged with unspoken tension. She greeted me with forced warmth, as if we were still allies. The investors glanced between us, confusion flickering in their eyes. "So," one of them began. "Whose idea is this, really?" I wanted to scream, to expose her lies in front of everyone, but I also knew that anger alone wouldn't win me respect. So I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "This is an idea I have been developing for years," I said firmly. "Every detail, every strategy has come from countless hours of work I poured into it." What you heard from her was my voice, echoed through someone else's mouth, RT. Shifted uncomfortably, but kept her composure. "We've always worked together," she interjected smoothly. "It's natural for our ideas to overlap. I just happened to pitch it first." The investors exchanged glances, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker. Not at me, but at her. Because there is something undeniable about authenticity. No matter how well someone imitates you, they can't replicate the fire that comes from building something with your own hands. As I spoke, my passions spilled out, not rehearsed, not stolen, but real. The meeting ended with polite words, promises, to follow up. But I knew something had shifted. She might have stolen my stage, but she couldn't steal the conviction in my voice. And investors, more than anything, are drawn to conviction. When I left the room that day, I was still angry, still heartbroken. But beneath the pain, a quiet realization took root. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the breaking point, yes, the ultimate betrayal. But it was also the moment I stopped underestimating myself. She had taken what she could, but she hadn't taken me. And that, I realized, would make all the difference. Rock bottom doesn't announce itself with a single dramatic crash. It creeps in slowly, night after night, until you wake up one morning and realize you've been living there without even knowing it. That's where I found myself after the betrayal, the place beneath disappointment, beneath anger, beneath even heartbreak. It was the hollow space where hope goes quiet, where every thought becomes a weight pressing against your chest. The first week after the confrontation with my best friend, I could barely function. My phone kept lighting up with messages and missed calls, but I ignored them all. I couldn't bear to hear investors' questions, or worse, their silence. Every email felt like a reminder that my dream was no longer fully mine, that something precious had been taken and corrupted. My desk, once cluttered with notebooks and scribbled diagrams, now looked like an altar to failure. I couldn't bring myself to touch a single page. Sleep became elusive. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment that had led me here. The late nights when she had stayed on the phone with me, listening to my ideas with a quiet eagerness that I mistook for support. The afternoons when we laughed over coffee, when she said things like, "You're the visionary, I'm just here to cheer you on." Lies. All of it. Or maybe not lies at the time, but they felt like lies now, twisted by hindsight. My brain became a cruel projector, running reels of our friendship side by side with her betrayal, until I couldn't separate one from the other. Food lost its taste. Days blurred into each other. I went from checking my inbox obsessively to ignoring it altogether. Even walking outside felt unbearable, The world looked too bright, too indifferent. Strangers hurried past me, chasing their own ambitions, while I trudged through the fog of my own collapse. The worst part wasn't the idea of losing investors. It wasn't even losing the startup. It was the gnawing voice inside me that whispered, "Maybe she was right. Maybe you're not the one who can pull this off. Maybe you were never good enough." That voice was relentless. It followed me into the shower, into the kitchen, into bed. It was there when I sat in front of my laptop, cursor blinking on an empty screen. Every time I tried to write, to rebuild, it hissed back, "Why bother? She's already ahead. She's smarter. She's bolder. She's the one they'll choose." I didn't tell anyone how bad it had gotten. Outwardly, I played the part of someone handling it. When friends texted, I replied with short lines, "I'm fine. Just busy." When my parents asked, I gave them vague updates. I couldn't bring myself to admit how hollow I felt, how stripped of purpose. To admit it would mean saying out loud that the betrayal had broken me, and I wasn't ready to give her that satisfaction, even in private. Nights were the hardest. When the world went still, when there were no distractions, the pain came alive. I'd scroll through old notes, flipping through sketches of ideas that once filled me with excitement. Now they mocked me. I wondered if I had wasted years chasing a dream that was destined to be stolen. There were nights when I cried until my throat was raw. Other nights, I sat motionless, numb, staring at the city lights from my window, wondering if anyone else in those glowing towers knew what it was like to feel so utterly gutted. Betrayal is lonely. It isolates you, convinces you that no one could possibly understand the depth of the wound. One evening, I hit the lowest point. I was sitting in the dark, blinds closed, when a message pinged on my phone. It was from an investor I had once admired, someone whose words carried weight in the industry. The message was short, almost cruel in its brevity. She delivered the pitch with more confidence. "We're going with her." That was it. Confirmation of my worst. Fear. The last thread of hope snapped, and I felt myself collapse into despair. I turned my phone face down and let the tears come, hot and relentless. That night, I whispered the words I had been avoiding. Maybe I should give up. The thought of walking away felt like relief and agony all at once. Relief, because it meant the end of this unbearable fight. Agony, because it meant erasing years of work, silencing the fire that had burned inside me for so long. Could I really do it? Could I abandon the dream that had once defined me? For days, I wrestled with that question. I barely left my apartment. My world shrank to four walls and the echo of my doubts. Friends grew worried, but I deflected them, with excuses. I wasn't ready to face anyone, not while I felt like a shadow of myself. And yet, even at rock bottom, something unexpected began to stir. It wasn't loud or sudden, but a whisper deep inside. A whisper that said, "You're still here." Even stripped of investors, stripped of trust, stripped of certainty, I was still here. Broken, yes. Bruised, yes. But alive. The realization didn't heal me overnight. It didn't erase the pain, but it planted a seed. I started noticing that the act of surviving itself was proof of something. Proof that betrayal hadn't destroyed me completely. Proof that even in the quietest moments of despair, I still wanted more than to simply give up. Slowly, painfully, I began to see rock bottom for what it was. Not just an ending, but a foundation. The lowest place meant there was nowhere to go but up. And though I wasn't ready to climb yet, I was beginning to sense that I could. That shift didn't feel like triumph. It felt fragile, uncertain. But it was enough to mark the beginning of something new. Rock bottom wasn't where my story ended. It was where the rebuilding would one day begin. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I still had a future worth fighting for. Rock bottom had left me hollow, but somewhere in that emptiness was the space to start again. The betrayal had stripped me of everything I thought I knew: trust, confidence, certainty. But it had not taken away the one thing that mattered most: my vision. What she stole was only an idea frozen in time, a snapshot of what I once imagined. But ideas evolve. Ideas grow. And what I had built was not just a pitch or a prototype. It was a living, breathing dream that could be reborn. The first step wasn't glamorous. It was messy, awkward, filled with false starts. I remember sitting at my desk one morning, sunlight cutting across the notebooks I had abandoned for weeks. I picked one up, flipped through the pages, and realized the words weren't dead. They were waiting for me to breathe life back into them. That day, I opened a fresh page and wrote in bold, shaky letters, "This is not the end." From that moment, everything shifted. I didn't dive headfirst into the startup again. I couldn't. My wounds were too raw, my confidence too fragile. Instead, I started small. One task a day. Sometimes it was rereading old notes with clearer eyes. Sometimes it was researching market trends to see where my idea could adapt. Other days, it was as simple as emailing one potential connection, forcing myself to reach out even though rejection terrified me. Each action was a thread, fragile, on its own. But together they began to weave a net strong enough to catch me when doubt returned. And doubt did return. Often. There were mornings when I woke up convinced I was wasting my time, that she had already won, that investors would never look at me without seeing the shadow of betrayal. But then I would remember something crucial. Investors didn't just buy into ideas, they bought into people. And she could copy my pitch, my slides, even my words, but she couldn't copy me. That realization became my anchor. If I wanted to rise again, I had to rebuild not just the business, but myself. I began with discipline. I created a new routine: early mornings dedicated to strategy, afternoons for networking, evenings for reflection. I treated my healing as seriously as my work: running, journaling, meditating, eating meals that nourished instead of numbed. Every habit became a brick in the foundation of a stronger version of me. Next came the pivot. Betrayal had forced me to see my idea through a harsher lens, and in doing so, I noticed flaws I had once ignored. She had stolen the version of my startup that was unpolished, raw. I would build the version that was sharper, more resilient, impossible to ignore. I refined the product, tested it with small groups, listened to feedback with a humility I hadn't always had before. What surprised me most was how people responded. Not with pity, but with admiration. When I shared my story carefully, honestly, without bitterness, others leaned in. They wanted to help. Some offered advice. Others opened doors. Slowly, my network began to grow beyond the narrow circle I had once depended on. I wasn't just rebuilding an idea. I was building alliances, connections, trust. The irony was striking. What I had lost in betrayal, I was gaining back tenfold through resilience. One meeting stands out vividly. A mentor I respected invited me for coffee. I expected skepticism, maybe polite encouragement. Instead, after listening to my refined pitch, he leaned back, smiled, and said, "This feels stronger than anything you described before. Do you realize what you've done? You turned betrayal into fuel." His words stayed with me. They became a quiet mantra on the hard days. Fuel. Not fire that burned me down, but fire that powered me forward. There were still setbacks, of course. Prototypes that failed. Investors who weren't convinced. Nights when exhaustion whispered, "Quit while you still can." But the difference now was that I didn't collapse under them. Every failure felt less like a door slamming shut, and more like a detour sign pointing me toward a better path. And with each detour, I grew tougher, smarter, more strategic. Confidence, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's quiet, steady, the kind that sits in your bones and reminds you that no betrayal, no rejection, can erase your worth. That was the kind of confidence I was building, unyielding, unshakable. Family gatherings shifted again. Relatives who once pitied me now asked for updates eagerly. Friends who had pulled back during my collapse returned, this time with respect, in their eyes. Even in professional spaces, I noticed the difference. My voice carried weight, not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. My former best friend, meanwhile, lingered like a shadow at the edge of my progress. I would hear about her occasionally, her startup stumbling, her charm wearing thin with investors who realized she couldn't deliver substance. Each time, I felt a pang of something that wasn't quite satisfaction, wasn't quite sorrow. It was clarity. She had stolen my idea, yes, but she couldn't build what she didn't understand. She mistook vision for a product, forgetting that vision is alive, evolving, and it belonged only to me. By now, my startup wasn't just a project. It was a statement, a declaration that resilience beats betrayal, that trust broken doesn't mean dreams broken. Every refined feature, every successful pitch, every handshake felt like a step away from the wreckage and toward a horizon that was finally mine. Late at night, I often stood by my window again. The same view that once mocked me now felt like a promise. The city lights weren't indifferent anymore. They were alive, pulsing with opportunity. I would whisper to myself, "You survived. You rebuilt. You're still standing." And in those moments, I knew the truth. The betrayal that once shattered me had become the crucible that forged me. I wasn't just back on my feet. I was stronger, sharper, and more determined than I had ever been. The rebuild wasn't about reclaiming what I lost. It was about creating something greater than I had ever imagined. It was about becoming someone greater than I had ever believed I could be. The day of the investor meeting arrived with a weight that was both terrifying and exhilarating. For weeks, I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, refining the product, reshaping the vision, and preparing for this exact moment. But nothing could fully erase the tension in my chest as I stood in front of the glass doors of the high-rise building, sunlight glinting off the steel frame like a spotlight daring me to step forward. I wasn't just walking into a pitch. I was walking into a battlefield. Inside, the air was charged with ambition. Sleek suits, polished shoes, the subtle clinking of coffee cups. All of it screamed of power and judgment. Investors sat around a long table, their expressions a blend of curiosity and calculation. And there, across the room she was, my former best friend, the one who had stolen not just my idea, but my trust. She looked radiant on the surface, dressed immaculately, confidence dripping from every gesture. She caught my eye and smirked. A silent taunt. "This is mine now." For a moment, my stomach twisted. Old wounds ached. But then I remembered why I was here. She had taken my idea, yes. But what she could never take was my journey, my passion, my authenticity. The pitches began. She went first. With dazzling slides and rehearsed charm, she introduced her startup. The graphics were clean, the buzzwords sharp, and she spoke with the ease of someone who had practiced in front of the mirror 1,000 times. Investors nodded politely. A few even leaned forward, intrigued by the polish. She smiled wider, feeding off their interest. But, as she dove deeper, cracks appeared. She spoke of projections without substance, of market potential without evidence. When questions came, her answers skimmed the surface, deflecting depth. She dazzled with performance, but I could see the investors exchanging subtle glances, the kind that said, "Is there more?" And then, it was my turn. As I stood, my hands trembled for a split second. I placed them firmly on the table, grounding myself. Then I looked directly at the room, not at her, not at the betrayal, but at the people who had the power to decide. And I began, not with numbers or slogans, but with a story. I told them about the problem my startup aimed to solve, not as a statistic, but as a lived experience. I painted the late nights of research, the users I had spoken to, the failures I had learned from, the quiet victories that shaped the product. I showed them the evolution of the idea, not stolen fragments, but a journey of persistence and innovation. Slides flickered behind me, but they weren't just decoration. Every graph had data I could defend. Every projection was backed by careful analysis. When I spoke of market demand, I cited interviews and surveys I had personally conducted. When I described the product's features, I demonstrated not just functionality, but purpose. The room leaned in. One investor interrupted. "But how do you handle scalability in such a saturated market?" I smiled. I had expected the question. I pulled up a case study, highlighted the adaptability of our model, and shared a story of a beta tester who had pushed the product in an unexpected way, revealing its hidden potential. The investor's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. Another asked, "Your competition is fierce. What sets you apart?" This time, I didn't just speak. I leaned forward, meeting their eyes. "Because this isn't just a business to me. It's my life's work. Every line of code, every strategy, every pivot comes from years of lived experience and resilience. Competitors can mimic features. They can't mimic conviction." Silence followed, heavy and electric. I could feel the weight of my words settling in the room. From the corner of my eye, I saw her fidget. Her smirk was gone, replaced by a thin line of tension. She scribbled in her notebook as though scrambling for a comeback. But the spotlight had shifted, and she knew it. The Q&A continued. But each answer I gave seemed to build momentum. Investors nodded, exchanged notes, whispered to each other with interest. I wasn't just surviving the scrutiny, I was thriving under it. And then came the final moment. The lead investor, a stern man with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned back and folded his hands. He had said little throughout the presentations, but his authority was obvious. The room quieted as he finally spoke. "Both pitches had strengths," he began, his gaze sweeping from her to me. "One had polish, the other had depth. One felt rehearsed, the other felt lived." He paused, letting the tension hang thick, in the air. Then he looked at me. "We're choosing to move forward with you." The words hit like a thunderclap. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. Relief, triumph, vindication, all of it rushed through me in a tidal wave. The betrayal, the nights of doubt, the endless rebuilding, it had all led to this. Across the table, she froze. Her smile faltered, her face pale. She tried to mask it with a polite nod, but I saw the flicker of rage and disbelief in her eyes. For once, her charm couldn't save her. Applause broke out softly as the meeting concluded. Investors shook my hand, their grips firm, their smiles genuine. They spoke of next steps, of partnership, of scaling possibilities. Each handshake felt like a seal on my redemption. As the room emptied, I caught her lingering by the exit. She looked at me, eyes burning with something between envy and regret. "This isn't over," she muttered under her breath. I didn't flinch. I met her gaze steadily and replied, "It never was about you. It was always about the dream." And with that, I turned away, not in bitterness, but in strength. Walking out of that glass tower, the city stretched before me like a new horizon. I had walked in with the weight of betrayal and walked out with the validation of vision. Investors hadn't just chosen me over her, They had chosen authenticity over imitation, resilience over performance. That day wasn't just the climax of my story. It was the proof that no betrayal, no theft, no false charm could outshine the power of truth. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't been necessary. Victory had taken its place. The news traveled faster than I could have imagined. Within days of the investor decision, the circles that once praised my former best friend for her charm began whispering about her collapse. People who had once eagerly returned her calls now ignored her messages. Those who had once introduced her proudly began to distance themselves, cautious not to be associated with the scandal of stolen ideas. At first, I almost couldn't believe how swiftly the tide had turned. I had assumed she would still find a way to thrive. Her charisma had always been her weapon, her ability to talk her way out of corners legendary. But betrayal leaves a mark, and in the world of startups and investments, reputation is everything. When word spread that she had pitched a stolen idea, that the very foundation of her pitch was built on deception, no amount of polish could save her. Her downfall wasn't loud. It wasn't a dramatic explosion of headlines or lawsuits splashed across front pages. Instead, it was quiet and suffocating, like a flame slowly losing oxygen. Invitations stopped arriving. Meetings were canceled. People stopped listening. In the world she craved most, the spotlight, she became invisible. Meanwhile, my world shifted in the opposite direction. The investors who had chosen me did more than write checks. They opened doors. Through them, I gained access to networks I had only dreamed of, mentors who had walked the path before me, and opportunities that multiplied as word spread about my resilience and vision. Suddenly, people were asking to collaborate with me, to learn from me, to build with me. I wasn't just the founder of an idea anymore. I was a leader of a movement, and that contrast, the role reversal between us, was more satisfying than any revenge could have been. She, who once stood in the spotlight, desperate for applause, now sat in the shadows of her choices. And I, the practical one she dismissed, the sibling-like friend she underestimated, stood on a foundation of respect that couldn't be faked. I would hear things occasionally. A mutual acquaintance would mention how she struggled to find work, how her once lavish lifestyle shrank into something more modest, how the confidence she once wielded like a sword had dulled into bitterness. I didn't celebrate her pain, though. I didn't need to. My life was full enough with its own momentum. Her downfall wasn't my triumph, it was her own making. What mattered most to me wasn't that she lost. It was that I won in a way that couldn't be undone. I had stability now. My startup grew steadily, not explosively, but with intention and strength. Each milestone, hiring the first team member, signing the first major partnership, launching the product to real customers, felt like proof that I was walking the right path. The applause I received wasn't borrowed or fleeting. It came from people who saw the work, the effort, the authenticity behind every step. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had wanted the applause so badly that she cut corners to grab it. I had walked the harder road, carrying scars and doubts, but I had earned a respect that couldn't be stripped away. That was the real reversal. She had sought validation and lost everything, while I had let go of the need for it and found more than I ever expected. One night I sat in my apartment, the same one where I had once felt broken and alone after discovering her betrayal. This time, though, the space felt different. The silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. I thought back to the countless nights of doubt, the tears shed over what I thought was the end of my future. And then I thought of where I was now. Surrounded by mentors, backed by investors, supported by a team that believed in the vision as much as I did, and I realized the betrayal hadn't ruined me. It had rerouted me. I didn't hear from her directly, not for a long time. But eventually a message popped up in my inbox. It was short, almost hesitant. She wrote that she hoped I was doing well, that she had been reflecting on her mistakes, that maybe one day we could talk. I stared at the words for a long time, emotions stirring. There was a time when I would have longed for that message, a time when I would have begged for acknowledgement, apology, closure. But now I didn't need it. My closure had already come, not from her words, but from my journey. So, I didn't reply, not out of spite, but out of peace. I had nothing left to prove, nothing left to reclaim. My life had moved forward, and hers was no longer a part of it. That, to me, was the most profound role reversal of all. I was no longer bound by her betrayal. She was the one still haunted by it. I was no longer the friend waiting for validation. I was the builder of my own destiny. As my company grew, I spoke more often at events, sharing my story with others, entrepreneurs, dreamers, even students who wondered what it took to keep going when the world seemed to crumble. I didn't hide. The betrayal. I told it honestly, because I wanted others to understand that even the deepest wounds can be transformed into resilience. Each time I shared it, I saw faces in the audience soften with recognition, people nodding as though they too had carried the weight of betrayal. And every time, I ended the story not with bitterness, but with the truth. Betrayal doesn't define you. What defines you is how you rise after it. That message carried further than I ever imagined. It wasn't just about me anymore. My journey had become a mirror for others to see their own strength. The role reversal was no longer about her and me. It was about me and the person I used to be, the one who doubted, who needed approval, who thought security came from others. That version of me was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true stability comes from within. Looking back, I could finally see the whole arc clearly. She had stolen my idea, but in doing so, she had revealed who I was truly meant to become. She had forced me into the fire, and I had come out stronger. Her fall wasn't my victory. My rise was, and as the years passed, I carried that lesson with me in every decision, every venture, every relationship. Trust is precious. Betrayal is painful. But neither can break you if you decide that your worth is yours to define. In the Eye. And she became a cautionary tale. A reminder of how quickly facades crumble when they're built on lies. And I became something else. Proof that resilience outshines betrayal. That authenticity outlasts performance. And that sometimes the greatest revenge is no revenge at all, because I didn't need to destroy her. The truth had already done that. All I needed was to rise. There are stories that end with fireworks, loud, explosive, impossible to ignore. And then there are stories that end like mine, in quiet clarity, in dignity, in the kind of peace that doesn't need applause. My journey didn't conclude with dramatic revenge or a victory speech in front of the very people who doubted me. It ended with something far more valuable, the realization that betrayal cannot define me unless I let it. For so long, I had believed that my worth was tied to what others gave or refused to give me. My parents' approval, my best friend's loyalty, investors' validation. I thought inheritance was security, thought friendship was unconditional, thought loyalty was guaranteed. And when each of those illusions shattered, I was left raw, exposed, stripped of everything I thought made me whole. But here's the irony. In losing everything I thought I needed, I found everything I truly required. Betrayal broke me, yes. But it also revealed me. It forced me to stop waiting for permission to exist, to stop relying on borrowed crowns or borrowed wealth. It showed me that my resilience was not theoretical. It was real, forged in nights of doubt and mornings where I chose to rise anyway. When I think back to my best friend, The one who smiled at me across coffee tables as we dreamed together. The one who laughed with me about late-night brainstorming sessions. I still feel the sting. There is no denying that. Trust, once broken, leaves scars. But scars are not weaknesses. They are proof that you survived something designed to break. You and mine remind me every day that I walked through fire and came out stronger. She stole my idea, but she couldn't steal my destiny. That sentence became a mantra for me, one that I held on to as I rebuilt. Ideas can be copied, presentations can be mimicked, but authenticity cannot be duplicated. Investors didn't choose me because I was flawless. They chose me because my passion was real. My work was consistent. My vision was deeper than surface-level polish. And in the end, authenticity outlasted performance. The friend who betrayed me is no longer my enemy. She is a chapter in my story, one that I've read and closed. Her choices exposed her, not me. Her downfall was not my triumph. It was her own undoing. My victory lay not in watching her fall, but in knowing that I no longer cared whether she stood beside me or not. And that, I've learned, is the truest form of closure. Not needing to win over those who wronged you, but realizing you no longer need them at all. For anyone listening, maybe your betrayal looks different. Maybe it was a friend like mine, or maybe it was family, or maybe it was an institution that failed you. Betrayal comes in many forms, but the lesson remains the same. You are not what was taken from you. You are what you choose to build afterward. Yes, you will cry. Yes, you will doubt. Yes, you will spend nights asking why it happened, why you weren't enough, why the people you trusted most turned their backs on you. That pain is real. It deserves to be felt. But it does not deserve to define you. I stopped asking, why me? And started asking, what now? That single shift changed everything. Instead of replaying the betrayal like a broken record, I replayed the lessons. I looked at what I had done right, at the instincts that had carried me this far, at the resilience I didn't even know I had, and from that place of reflection, I built again. And here's the beautiful irony. The very thing they thought would ruin me became the thing that made me unshakable. They thought taking my inheritance would weaken me. They thought stealing my idea would silence me. Instead, those losses stripped me of illusions and forced me to create something real. It turns out the strongest foundation is not money or applause or even loyalty. The strongest foundation is self-belief. So when I look ahead now, I don't see myself as the victim of betrayal. I see myself as the architect of my own destiny. I am no longer the forgotten child, the friend overshadowed, the one who waited for fairness that never came. I am the woman who built something greater than anyone expected because she refused to stay broken. In my silence, there is strength. In my scars, there is proof. In my independence, there is freedom. And to anyone listening, whether you've been betrayed by a friend, underestimated by your family, or overlooked by the very people who should have seen you, I want you to know this. They can take what you have, but they can never take who you are. They can dismiss your ideas, but they cannot dismiss your determination. They can doubt you, but their doubt does not erase your truth. You are more than what was stolen from you. That is the lesson I carry into every meeting, every project, every room I enter. Not arrogance, not bitterness, just quiet confidence that I have walked through storms and still stand tall, because closure is not about revenge. It's not about watching them fall or waiting for them to apologize. Closure is the moment you realize you don't need their acknowledgement anymore. Closure is when you stop carrying their choices as your burden. Closure is when you let go, not to free them, but to free yourself. My best friend stole my idea. My parents sold my inheritance. My family dismissed me. And yet, here I am. Not broken, not defeated, but stronger, freer, and more certain than I have ever been. The story doesn't end with her. It ends with me, and in my ending, there is no bitterness, only peace. Because while betrayal may have shaped my story, resilience wrote the final chapter. This is my closure. This is my revenge. And most importantly, this is my beginning.